The bell above the door jingled softly as Emily Carter pushed it open and stepped into the grocery store. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day when most people were either at work or busy with errands they had been putting off all week. The air smelled faintly of fresh bread from the bakery section, mixed with the crisp scent of vegetables being misted nearby. Emily pulled her hoodie tighter around herself and grabbed a shopping cart. She wasn't in any hurry, just picking up a few things for dinner tonight. She wandered down the first aisle, scanning the shelves without much thought. Dinner plans weren't complicated. Spaghetti, maybe some garlic bread if she felt ambitious, enough to make it from scratch. As she reached for a jar of marinara sauce, she noticed someone standing too close behind her. At first, she didn't think much of it. Grocery stores got crowded sometimes, even on slow days. But then the person cleared his throat loudly, almost mockingly, and said, "Hey, watch where you're going." Emily turned around slowly, startled by the gruff tone. Standing there was a tall, broad-shouldered man with unkempt hair and a scowl that made him look perpetually angry. His leather jacket creaked slightly as he shifted his weight, and his boots looked like they hadn't seen polish in years. He sneered at her, pointing to a box of cereal that had fallen onto the floor. "You knocked this off the shelf," he accused, though Emily hadn't touched anything near him. "I'm sorry," she replied quickly, bending down to pick up the box. "I didn't mean to." But the man didn't seem satisfied. Instead of letting it go, he leaned closer, invading her personal space. "Yeah, well, maybe you should pay more attention next time," he snapped. His voice carried across the aisle, drawing curious glances from a couple of shoppers who pretended not to notice once they saw the tension building. Emily straightened up, clutching the cereal box tightly in one hand while trying to maneuver her cart away from him. "Excuse me," she muttered, hoping to slip past him and continue her shopping in peace. But the man, whose name tag read Jake on his jacket pocket, wasn't done yet. He stepped sideways, blocking her path again. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "You just gonna walk away, after messing up my day?" Emily froze. Her heart began to race as she realized this wasn't going to end easily. Jake's eyes narrowed as he studied her face, clearly enjoying the discomfort he was causing. "What's the matter, sweetheart? Cat got your tongue?" he taunted, taking another step forward until he was practically looming over her. His words came faster now, each one sharper than the last. "You know, girls like you shouldn't be so clumsy. Maybe you need someone to teach you how to act in public." His gaze lingered on her longer than necessary, making her skin crawl. Emily tightened her grip on the shopping cart handle, forcing herself to stay calm despite the rising panic inside her chest. Just as Jake opened his mouth to say something else, a deep voice interrupted them. "Is there a problem here?" Both. Emily and Jake turned toward the source of the voice. Standing at the edge of the aisle was an older man wearing a cowboy hat and a denim jacket. His weathered face bore the marks of age, but his steel-gray eyes were sharp and alert. There was something about his presence that commanded respect, even from strangers. Jake frowned, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "Who asked you, old man?" he shot back, turning his full attention to the newcomer. The man didn't flinch. If anything, his expression grew even calmer. "I'm asking," he said simply, stepping closer. "Because if there's trouble brewing, I'd rather nip it in the bud right now." Emily recognized the voice instantly. Relief washed over her as she realized who it belonged to. "Grandpa!" she exclaimed, her voice trembling slightly. Jack Norris gave her a reassuring nod before returning his focus to Jake. For a moment, no one spoke. Jake sized up the older man, clearly skeptical that this guy could pose any real threat. After a beat, he smirked and shook his head. "Look, Pops, why don't you mind your own business? This doesn't concern you." Jack tilted his head slightly, almost amused by Jake's bravado. "Actually, it does," he replied evenly. "That's my granddaughter you're harassing, so yeah, it concerns me quite a bit." The word granddaughter hung in the air like a challenge. Jake glanced between Emily and Jack, trying to gauge whether this was some kind of bluff. When neither of them backed down, his smirk faltered ever so slightly. Still, he wasn't ready to admit defeat. Crossing his arms, he leaned back against the shelf, deliberately knocking over another box of cereal in the process. "So what?" he growled. "You think you can scare me? Go ahead, try something." Jack didn't move. He stood perfectly still, his hands resting lightly at his sides. Anyone watching might have assumed he was harmless, an ordinary grandfather out running errands with his family. But those who knew better would recognize the subtle signs. The way his feet were planted firmly on the ground, the way his fingers twitched ever so slightly, ready to spring into action if needed. Emily held her breath, torn between gratitude for her grandfather's intervention and fear of what might happen next. She had heard stories about Jack Norris before, how he used to travel the world, teaching martial arts and earning a reputation as one of the toughest men alive. But those were just stories, weren't they? Surely he wouldn't actually fight someone here in the middle of a grocery store, or would he? Jake must have been thinking along similar lines because he suddenly lunged forward, shoving Jack hard in the chest. "Come on, old man, show me what you've got," he shouted, clearly expecting Jack to stumble backward or fall flat on his butt. Instead, Jack stood firm. Not only did he not budge, but he also caught Jake's wrist mid-push, twisting it gently, yet firmly until the younger man winced in pain. For a split second, everyone, including Jake, forgot to breathe. Then, with a flick of his wrist, Jack released him, leaving Jake staggering backward in shock. "You really want to do this?" Jack asked quietly, his voice carrying a note of warning. "Because trust me, son, you won't like where this goes." Jake stared at him, his bravado crumbling under the weight of Jack's steely gaze. For the first time since the encounter began, doubt crept into his expression. But pride, and perhaps stupidity, kept him from backing down completely. Grinding his teeth, he muttered something under his breath and stormed off, muttering threats about settling this later. As soon as Jake disappeared around the corner, Emily rushed to her grandfather's side. "Are you okay?" she asked, anxiously, her eyes wide with concern. Jack chuckled softly, patting her shoulder. "Don't worry, kiddo. I've dealt with worse than him." He glanced toward the direction Jake had gone, his expression thoughtful. "Though I suspect he'll be back sooner rather than later. We might want to finish our shopping quickly." With that, the two of them resumed their task, though Emily couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the last they'd see of Jake. Little did she know, her grandfather was already several steps ahead, planning for whatever came next. The rest of their shopping trip passed without incident, though Emily couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that Jake might return. She kept glancing over her shoulder as they moved through the aisles, half expecting him to pop out from behind a shelf or corner them in the checkout line. But Jack seemed completely unfazed, humming softly to himself as he helped Emily load groceries into the cart. "You're awfully calm about this," Emily finally said, breaking the silence. They were standing by the produce section, picking out apples. "Aren't you worried he'll come back?" Jack gave her a small smile, his eyes twinkling under the brim of his cowboy hat. "Worrying doesn't do much good, sweetheart. If he comes back, and I'm betting he will, we'll deal with it then. No sense borrowing trouble." Emily frowned, not entirely convinced. "But what if he brings friends? Or tries something worse?" She paused, lowering her voice. "You don't even know what he's capable of." Jack chuckled softly, reaching for a red apple and inspecting it carefully before tossing it into the cart. "Oh, I think I have a pretty good idea," he said. His tone was light, almost playful, but there was an edge to it that made Emily glance up sharply. For a moment she thought she saw something hard flicker in his gray eyes, something dangerous, but it vanished so quickly she wondered if she'd imagined it. "Grandpa," she started, unsure how to finish. He patted her shoulder gently. "Don't you worry about me, kiddo. I've handled bigger problems than some punk with an attitude. Let's just get these groceries home, okay?" Emily nodded reluctantly, though her stomach still churned with unease. As they headed toward the checkout, she noticed a few other shoppers whispering and glancing their way. Word had spread quickly about what had happened in the aisle earlier, and while no one approached them directly, the tension in the air was palpable. By the time they reached the parking lot, Emily felt like everyone in the store knew who they were. and who Jack was. Outside, Jack loaded the bags into the bed of his old pickup truck while Emily climbed into the passenger seat. She watched him as he worked, marveling at how effortlessly he moved despite his age. There was a quiet strength about him, a kind of confidence that came from years of experience. It was easy to forget sometimes that her grandfather wasn't just a retired rancher who liked telling stories about his youth. He was more than that, much more. As they drove home, Emily tried to distract herself by flipping through the radio stations, settling on a soft country tune that filled the cab with its gentle melody. Jack hummed along absently, tapping his fingers against the steering wheel. Neither of them spoke until they pulled into the driveway of their modest house on the outskirts of town. Once inside, Emily unpacked the groceries while Jack brewed a pot of coffee. The aroma of freshly ground beans soon filled the kitchen, mingling with the scent of baked goods from earlier in the day. Despite everything that had happened, the familiar routine helped calm Emily's nerves, at least for a little while. Later, that evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Emily decided to broach the subject again. "Do you really think Jake will come back?" she asked quietly, wrapping her sweater tighter around herself against the cool night air. Jack leaned back in his chair, sipping his coffee slowly. "Like I said before, it's likely. Guys like him don't take kindly to being shown up, especially in front of others. Pride gets in the way of common sense." Emily frowned, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "What if he tries to hurt you, or me?" Her grandfather set his cup down and turned to look at her, his expression serious for the first time all day. "Listen to me, Emily," he said firmly. "I won't let anyone hurt you. Not now, not ever. That's a promise. And as for him..." He paused, letting the unfinished sentence hang in the air between them. "Well, let's just say I've faced tougher opponents than Jake." Despite his reassurance, Emily couldn't help but feel a knot of anxiety tightening in her chest. She wanted to believe him, to trust that he could handle whatever came their way, but the memory of Jake's sneering face lingered in her mind, refusing to fade. Over the next couple of days, life returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could be after such an encounter. Emily went to work at the local library, shelving books and helping patrons find what they needed. Jack spent his mornings tending to the small garden behind the house, and his afternoons tinkering with tools in the garage. Yet even amidst the routine, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Every time she heard footsteps behind her or saw a shadow move out of the corner of her eye, her heart skipped a beat. It wasn't until Thursday evening, when she and Jack were taking their usual walk around the neighborhood, that things took a turn. They had just rounded the corner onto Maple Street when a group of men stepped out from the shadows blocking their path. At the center of the group was Jake, his jaw clenched and his fists balled at his sides. Behind him stood 4 others, each one larger and more intimidating than the last. "Well, well," Jake drawled, his voice dripping with malice. "Look who decided to take a stroll tonight. Didn't think we'd run into you two so soon." Emily instinctively stepped closer to Jack, her pulse racing. Her grandfather, however, didn't seem fazed. He stopped walking and folded his arms across his chest, his posture relaxed but alert. "Evening, boys," he said calmly, his tone casual yet firm. "Something I can help you with?" Jake smirked, clearly enjoying the moment. "Yeah, actually, there is. See, I've been thinking about our little chat the other day. You humiliated me in front of everyone, and I don't take too kindly to that." Jack raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Humiliated you? Son, I barely touched you. If anything, you embarrassed yourself." The jab hit its mark. Jake's face darkened, and he took a step forward, his friends closing ranks behind him. "You're gonna regret saying that, old man. Big time." For a moment, no one moved. The only sounds were the rustling leaves overhead and the distant chirping of crickets. Then, without warning, Jake lunged, swinging a wild punch aimed straight at Jack's face. What happened next unfolded so quickly that Emily barely registered it. Jack sidestepped the blow with ease, grabbing Jake's arm mid-swing and twisting it behind his back. Before Jake could react, Jack delivered a sharp kick to the back of his knee, sending him sprawling to the ground. The other men hesitated, clearly caught off guard by the sudden display of skill. One of them charged forward, throwing a clumsy haymaker, but Jack ducked under it and countered with a swift elbow strike to the man's ribs. Another attacker rushed in from the side, only to find himself flat on his back moments later, gasping for breath. Within seconds, chaos erupted. The men shouted and scrambled to regroup, but Jack moved with precision and purpose, disarming each assailant with effortless efficiency. Emily watched in stunned silence as her grandfather, a man she'd always known as kind and gentle, transformed into someone else entirely. It was as if decades of training and experience had been distilled into every movement, every calculated strike. By the time the dust settled, all 5 men lay groaning on the pavement, clutching various injuries. Jake, battered and bruised, stared up at Jack with wide, fearful eyes. Who are you?" he stammered, his voice trembling. Jack crouched down beside him, his expression unreadable. "Just a guy trying to protect his family," he replied evenly. "Now here's what's going to happen. You and your buddies are going to leave us alone, forever, and if I hear so much as a whisper about you causing trouble for anyone else, I'll make sure you regret it. Understand?" Jake nodded frantically, too terrified to argue. Without another word, Jack stood up and gestured for Emily to follow him. As they walked away, leaving the defeated thugs behind, Emily glanced back once to see them scrambling to their feet and disappearing into the night. When they finally reached the safety of their front porch, Emily turned to her grandfather, her voice barely above a whisper. "Grandpa, what just happened?" Jack smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Let's just say I had a bit of practice back in the day." He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Come on, kiddo, let's go inside. We've got hot chocolate waiting." And with that, the two of them stepped inside, leaving the drama of the evening behind, for now. The warmth of the fire crackling in the hearth did little to ease Emily's nerves as she sat across from her grandfather. Her mind raced with questions, replaying the events of the evening over and over again like a broken record. She couldn't stop thinking about how effortlessly Jack had taken down those men, 5 against 1. And yet he hadn't even broken a sweat. It wasn't just skill. It was something deeper, something almost supernatural. "Grandpa," she began hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. "What exactly happened back there?" Jack glanced up from his coffee mug, his expression unreadable. He took another slow sip before setting the cup down on the side table beside him. For a moment he simply stared into the flames, lost in thought. Finally, he spoke, his tone measured and calm. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Emily shifted uncomfortably on the couch, her fingers twisting together in her lap. "I mean, who are you? Really? I know you're my grandpa and I love you, but what Jake said earlier, it made me wonder. You're not just some retired rancher, are you?" Jack chuckled softly, though there was no humor in it. Instead, it carried a hint of nostalgia, as if he were remembering a life long left behind. "I'm still your grandpa, kiddo. That hasn't changed. But yeah, there's more to the story than what I've told you." Emily leaned forward, her curiosity outweighing her fear. "Then tell me. Please, I need to understand." Jack sighed deeply, leaning back in his chair. His eyes reflected the flickering light of the fire, giving them an almost ethereal quality. "All right," he said after a pause. "But once I start talking, there's no going back. Are you sure you want to hear this?" She nodded firmly, her resolve strengthening. Whatever secrets her grandfather had been keeping, she deserved to know. After all, they involved her now. Jack took a deep breath and began. "A long time ago, before your mom was born, I traveled the world teaching martial arts. Not the kind you see in gyms or schools these days. Real combat training, the kind that could save your life in a fight. People called me a legend, though I never paid much attention to that. All I cared about was helping others learn how to protect themselves." Emily listened intently, her eyes wide with fascination. This version of her grandfather was so different from the man she'd grown up with, the one who fixed fences, baked pies, and told funny stories about his youth. Yet somehow it all made sense. The confidence, the strength, the way he carried himself, it all pointed to someone who had lived a life far beyond the ordinary. But that's only part of it, Jack continued. Over the years, I got involved in things most people wouldn't believe. Dangerous missions, secret operations protecting people who needed help. Some folks even called me a hero, though I never saw myself that way. I was just doing what felt right. Emily's jaw dropped slightly. You mean, like spy stuff? Like James Bond? He laughed, shaking his head. Not quite. No gadgets or fancy cars for me. Just hard work and determination. But yes, there were times when I had to step in and handle situations that required special skills. She frowned, trying to process everything he was saying. So why did you stop? Why come here and live such a quiet life? Jack's gaze softened, and for a moment he looked older than ever. Because sometimes saving the world means knowing when to step back and let someone else take the reins. I wanted a family, a home, a chance to live without looking over my shoulder every day. And when your grandma came along, he trailed off, a bittersweet smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Well, she gave me the reason I needed to leave all that behind. Emily felt a lump form in her throat. She knew her grandmother had passed away years ago, but hearing Jack talk about her brought back memories of their happy times together as a family. I miss her, she whispered. Me too, kiddo, he replied gently. Every single day. They sat in silence for a while, the sound of the fire crackling filling the space between them. Emily finally broke the quiet. Does Mom know about this, about who you really are? Jack shook his head. No, and I'd prefer to keep it that way. Your mom deserves to live her life without worrying about my past. Besides, that chapter closed a long time ago, or so I thought. Emily understood what he meant. Tonight's confrontation had reopened old wounds, forcing Jack to confront parts of himself he'd tried to bury. She reached out and placed a hand on his arm. Thank you for telling me. I know it must have been hard. He patted her hand affectionately. It's important you know the truth, especially after tonight. If something like this happens again, and it might, you'll be better prepared. Her stomach tightened at the thought of facing another situation like the one in the park. Do you think Jake will try anything else? Jack shrugged. Hard to say. Men like him don't give up easily, but they also don't usually stick around after getting knocked down twice. Still, we should stay alert. Trouble has a way of finding us whether we look for it or not. Emily nodded, though she wasn't entirely reassured. Despite Jack's confidence, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Jake's pride, and possibly his connections, wouldn't let him walk away quietly. She decided then and there that she wouldn't let her guard down, not until she was certain the danger had passed. The rest of the evening passed uneventfully. They talked about lighter topics, sharing laughs and reminiscing about happier times. By the time they headed to bed, Emily felt a bit more at ease, though her mind continued to churn with thoughts of what might come next. The following morning dawned bright and clear, with sunlight streaming through the curtains and casting golden patterns on the floor. Emily woke early, unable to sleep any longer. She dressed quickly and joined Jack in the kitchen, where he was already busy making pancakes. Morning, sleepyhead. He greeted her with a grin, flipping a pancake onto a plate. Hungry? She smiled despite herself, taking a seat at the table. Starving. As they ate breakfast together, the tension from the previous night seemed to fade further. Jack regaled her with tales of his adventures, carefully avoiding anything too dangerous or graphic. Emily listened eagerly, marveling at the breadth of his experiences. It was strange to think that the same man who taught her how to ride a bike and bake cookies had once faced down threats she couldn't even imagine. After breakfast, Jack suggested they spend the day working in the garden. Fresh air will do, us both good, he said, handing her a pair of gardening gloves. Besides, it's always nice to focus on something simple for a change. Emily agreed, grateful for the distraction. Together they planted new flowers, trimmed bushes, and pulled weeds. The work was satisfying, grounding them in the present moment and pushing aside lingering worries about Jake or anyone else who might cause trouble. By late afternoon, they had made significant progress. The garden looked vibrant and alive, bursting with color and life. As they stood back to admire their handiwork, Jack wrapped an arm around Emily's shoulders. See, life doesn't have to be complicated all the time. Sometimes the best moments are the ones we create right here, in our own backyard. Emily leaned into him, feeling a renewed sense of peace, for now at least everything felt okay. But deep down, she knew that the world outside their little haven was unpredictable, and that sooner or later, they'd have to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Emily resolved to stay strong. With Jack by her side, she felt ready to tackle whatever came their way. After all, legends didn't disappear. They simply waited for the right moment to rise again. The days that followed were deceptively calm. Emily and Jack fell back into their usual routines, though both remained vigilant. They went about their lives as if nothing unusual had happened, shopping for groceries, tending to the garden, and taking evening walks, but there was an unspoken awareness between them. The shadow of Jake loomed over everything, even if he hadn't shown his face again. Emily tried to convince herself that maybe Jack was right, that Jake and his friends had decided to leave them alone after their humiliating defeat. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing beneath the surface. It wasn't just paranoia, it was instinct, and her instincts had been screaming at her for days. One Saturday morning, Emily accompanied Jack to the farmer's market in the town square. It was one of their favorite weekend outings, a chance to stock up on fresh produce and homemade goods, while enjoying the lively atmosphere. Vendors called out to passers-by, offering samples of honey, jams, and baked bread. Children darted between stalls, laughing as they chased each other through the crowd. The air smelled of ripe fruits, roasted nuts, and sizzling street food. Despite the cheerful chaos around them, Emily found it hard to relax. Her eyes darted constantly, scanning the faces in the crowd. She couldn't help but notice several men, lingering nearby, their expressions cold and calculating. None of them approached directly, but their presence felt deliberate, like predators circling their prey. "Grandpa," she whispered, leaning closer to Jack as they browsed a table piled high with apples. "Do you see those guys?" Jack didn't look up immediately. He picked up an apple, examined it briefly, and placed it back on the pile. "Which ones?" he asked casually, his tone light enough to blend into the hum of conversation around them. Emily tilted her head slightly toward a group of 3 men standing near the edge of the market. They weren't doing anything overtly threatening. They were just standing there talking quietly. But something about them set off alarm bells in her mind. "Over there, by the fountain." Jack glanced in their direction without appearing too interested. After a moment, he nodded almost imperceptibly. "Yeah, I see them. Don't worry, kiddo. We're fine for now." His reassurance did little to ease her nerves. "What do we do? Should we leave?" "No need to rush off," Jack replied calmly, picking up another apple and tossing it gently in his hand. "Acting scared will only draw more attention. Let's finish our shopping and keep moving." Emily forced herself to nod, though her heart was pounding. She stayed close to Jack as they moved from stall to stall, trying to appear casual despite the knot of anxiety tightening in her chest. Every so often, she would catch glimpses of the men, or others like them, watching from the periphery. They never came closer, but their presence was constant, oppressive. By mid-morning, they had gathered most of what they needed: fresh vegetables, a loaf of crusty bread, and a jar of locally made honey. As they headed toward the last stall, a flower vendor selling vibrant bouquets, Emily spotted someone she recognized instantly. Jake. He was leaning against a lamppost, arms crossed, and a smug grin plastered across his face. His gaze locked onto hers, and for a brief second, time seemed to freeze. Then slowly, deliberately, he pushed off the post and began walking toward them. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She reached out instinctively, grabbing Jack's arm. "Grandpa, it's him." Jack didn't turn around right away. Instead, he continued browsing the flowers, his movements unhurried. "I see him," he said softly. "Stay calm." Jake stopped a few feet away, his smirk widening as he took in the sight of them. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. "Look who decided to show their faces today." Jack finally turned to face him, his expression neutral. "Morning, Jake. Enjoying the market?" Jake's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, thrown off by Jack's nonchalance. He recovered quickly, however, stepping closer until he was practically nose to nose with the older man. "You think you can embarrass me and walk away like nothing happened? You've got some nerve, old-timer." Jack raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Embarrass you? Son, I barely touched you. If anything, you should thank me. I gave you a lesson in humility. Something tells me you could use more of that." The jab hit its mark. Jake's face flushed with anger and he clenched his fists tightly. For a moment it looked like he might lash out then and there. But instead, he forced a laugh, glancing around at the growing number of curious onlookers. "You're funny, Pops. Real funny. But jokes don't last forever." Jack's voice hardened ever so slightly. "Neither does patience, son. I suggest you take my advice and move along before things get messy." Jake hesitated, clearly torn between his desire for revenge and the realization that this wasn't the place or time to act on it. Finally, he let out a low growl and stepped back, though his glare remained fixed on Jack. "This isn't over," he muttered under his breath, before turning and disappearing into the crowd. As soon as he was gone, Emily exhaled sharply, her shoulders sagging with relief. "That was Chloe," she murmured, gripping the handle of their shopping bag tightly. Jack patted her shoulder reassuringly. "We're okay, sweetheart. He's all bark and no bite. At least not where it counts." But Emily wasn't convinced. She knew Jake well enough by now to understand that he wouldn't give up easily. Whatever he was planning, it wouldn't end here. And judging by the way those other men had been watching them, it seemed likely that Jake wasn't working alone anymore. Later that afternoon, back at home, Emily helped Jack unpack their purchases while replaying the encounter in her mind. She couldn't stop thinking about the men at the market, the ones who had been watching them so intently, and how they seemed connected to Jake. It felt like pieces of a puzzle were starting to come together, forming a picture she didn't want to see. "Grandpa," she said suddenly, setting down a bag of carrots on the counter, "do you think Jake joined some kind of gang or something? Those guys at the market, they looked organized." Jack paused, his hand hovering over a bunch of bananas. "It's possible," he admitted after a moment. "Men like Jake often rely on numbers when they can't win on their own. If he's recruited backup, we'll need to be extra careful." Emily frowned, worry gnawing at her insides. What if they try to hurt us? Or worse? Her grandfather straightened up, his expression serious. "They won't. Not if I have anything to say about it." He placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "Listen to me, Emily. I've dealt with bigger threats than a couple of bullies. We'll handle this together, okay?" She nodded reluctantly, though doubt still lingered in her mind. "Okay." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jack broke the silence. "Tomorrow we're going to pay a visit to Sheriff Miller." Emily blinked in surprise. "The sheriff? Why?" "Because it's time to let someone else know what's going on," Jack explained. "If Jake and his crew are causing trouble, the law needs to step in. Besides," he added with a faint smile, "it's always better to have allies when you're outnumbered." Emily felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. Maybe involving the authorities would put an end to this once, and for all. "Do you really think he'll believe us?" Jack chuckled softly. "Sheriff Miller and I go way back. He knows better than to doubt me." For the first time in days, Emily allowed herself to feel a measure of peace. With Jack's experience, wisdom, and connections, they stood a fighting chance against whatever Jake had planned. And if history was any indication, legends like Jack Norris didn't lose easily. As night fell and the stars began to twinkle in the sky, Emily leaned back in her chair, letting the cool breeze wash over her. For now, at least, they were safe. But tomorrow would bring new challenges, and hopefully new solutions. One thing was certain: no matter what happened next, she wouldn't face it alone. The next morning, Emily and Jack drove to the sheriff's office early, before the heat of the day settled over the town. The building was nestled in the heart of Main Street, its brick exterior weathered by years of sun and rain. A faded sign above the door read "Sheriff's Office" in bold letters, and the American flag fluttered gently in the breeze beside it. Inside, the air smelled faintly of wood polish and old paper. The walls were lined with framed commendations and photographs of past sheriffs, their faces frozen in time. Behind the desk sat Sheriff Miller, a stout man with graying hair and a warm smile that seemed out of place given the seriousness of their visit. His badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights as he stood up to greet them. "Well, well, if it isn't Jack Norris," the sheriff said, extending a hand. "Haven't seen you around here in ages. What brings you to my neck of the woods?" Jack shook his hand firmly, his demeanor calm but purposeful. "Morning, Sheriff. I wish I could say this was just a friendly visit, but we've got a bit of a situation on our hands." Sheriff Miller raised an eyebrow, his smile fading slightly. He gestured for them to sit down. "Sit tight and tell me everything." Emily took a seat near the door, clutching her hands together nervously. Jack leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "It's about Jake and his crew. They've been harassing my granddaughter, and things escalated last week. We thought it was over after I handled them in the park, but yesterday they showed up again at the market. It's clear they're not going to back off." The sheriff frowned, grabbing a notepad and pen from his desk. "Start from the beginning. Give me all the details." For the next 20 minutes, Jack recounted everything that had happened, from Jake's initial harassment at the grocery store to the ambush in the park and finally to the unsettling encounter at the farmer's market. Emily chimed in occasionally, adding her perspective when necessary. By the end of their story, Sheriff Miller's expression had grown grim. "I see," he muttered, tapping the pen against the notepad thoughtfully. "And you're sure these guys are working together? Not just random troublemakers?" Jack nodded. "Positive. There's coordination there. Too much to be coincidence. Whoever Jake's teamed up with, they mean business." Sheriff Miller sighed heavily, leaning back in his chair. "Jake's always been a loose cannon, but this is something else entirely. If what you're saying is true, and I have no reason to doubt you, we'll need to act fast. This kind of behavior can spiral out of control quickly." Emily spoke up hesitantly. "What happens now? Will you arrest him?" The sheriff shook his head. "Not yet. Without concrete evidence, we'd be walking on thin ice. But don't worry, I'll send deputies to keep an eye on your place just in case, and I'll have a chat with Jake myself. Sometimes a little warning goes a long way." Jack smiled faintly. "Thanks, Sheriff. That's all we can ask for right now." As they left the office, Emily felt a glimmer of hope. Having the law on their side made her feel safer, even if the threat hadn't disappeared completely. Still, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Jake wouldn't stop so easily. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jack broke the silence. "You did good today, kiddo. Telling the sheriff was the right move." Emily managed a small smile. "I hope it works. I don't want to live like this forever, looking over my shoulder every second." "You won't have to," Jack assured her. "One way or another, this will end soon." His confidence was comforting, but Emily couldn't help wondering how. Would Jake listen to the sheriff's warnings, or would he double down, determined to prove himself? Her question was answered sooner than expected. 2 nights later, Emily woke abruptly to the sound of glass shattering downstairs. Her heart raced as she scrambled out of bed, grabbing her phone and tiptoeing toward the staircase. From below came muffled voices and the crash of furniture being overturned. Fear gripped her chest like a vice. She wanted to scream, to run, but instead she forced herself to stay quiet and think. Jack appeared behind her suddenly, fully dressed and holding a flashlight. His presence steadied her nerves. "Stay upstairs," he whispered urgently. "Call the sheriff and lock yourself in your room. I'll handle this." No, Emily protested, her voice barely audible. I'm not leaving you alone. He gave her a stern look. This isn't up for discussion. Do as I say. Reluctantly, she obeyed, retreating to her bedroom and dialing the sheriff's number with trembling fingers. Meanwhile, Jack descended the stairs silently, his movements deliberate and practiced. As he reached the living room, he spotted two figures rummaging through the cabinets. Without hesitation, he flicked on the light switch, flooding the room with brightness. Looking for something? Jack asked calmly, his tone sharp enough to cut steel. The intruders spun around, startled. One of them, a burly man with tattoos covering his arms, lunged forward, swinging wildly. Jack sidestepped effortlessly, delivering a precise kick to the man's knee that sent him sprawling to the floor. The second intruder hesitated, clearly unsure whether to fight or flee. Before he could decide, Jack disarmed him with a swift motion, pinning him against the wall. By the time the deputies arrived, both men were incapacitated and groaning in pain. Sheriff Miller stepped inside, taking in the scene with wide eyes. "Looks like I missed quite the party," he remarked dryly. Jack shrugged modestly. "Just tying up loose ends." Over the next few days, the truth came to light. Jake and his crew had been planning retaliation all along, convinced that Jack's reputation was nothing more than a bluff. Their arrogance had blinded them to the reality of who they were dealing with. With the evidence collected from the break-in, the sheriff arrested Jake and his accomplices, charging them with trespassing, vandalism, and attempted assault. When the dust finally settled, life began to return to normal, or as close to normal as it could be after such an ordeal. Emily found herself looking at her grandfather in a new light, grateful for his strength and wisdom. She realized that legends weren't defined by fame or recognition, but by the people they protected and the values they upheld. One evening, as they sat together by the fire, Emily turned to Jack with a thoughtful expression. "Grandpa, do you ever miss it? The adventures, the excitement?" He chuckled softly, gazing into the flames. "Sometimes. But then I remember why I chose this life, to build something real, something lasting. Adventures are fun, but they don't compare to family." Emily smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. For the first time in weeks, she felt truly at peace. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew they would face them together, as a team. And in the quiet moments between laughter and stories, she understood that some legends weren't meant to fade. They simply evolved, finding new ways to shine.